Part 2. 5 Mental Bombshells for Attacking Success. Chapter 6. You've got a problem? That's good. So you've got a problem. That's good. Why? Because repeated victories over your problems are the rungs on your ladder of success. With each victory, you grow in wisdom, stature, and experience. You become a better, bigger, more successful person each time you meet a problem and tackle and conquer it with PMA. Stop and think about it for a moment. Do you know of a single instance where any real achievement was made in your life or in the life of any person in history that was not due to a problem with which the individual was faced? Everyone has problems. This is because you and everything in the universe are in a constant process of change. Change is an inexorable natural law. What is important to you is that your success or failure to meet the challenges of change are dependent upon your mental attitude. You can direct your thoughts and control your emotions and thus regulate your attitude. You can choose whether your attitude will be positive or negative. You can decide whether you will affect, use, control, or harmonize with the changes in yourself and your environment. You can ordain your destiny. When you meet the challenges of change with PMA, you can intelligently solve each problem with which you are confronted. How do you meet a problem with PMA? If you know and believe the first principal element of a positive mental attitude, God is always a good God, then you can effectively use the following formula and meet your problems. When you are faced with a problem that needs a solution, regardless of how perplexing it may be: 1. Ask for divine guidance. Ask for help in finding the right solution. 2. Engage in thinking time for the purpose of solving your problems. Remember that every adversity has the seed of an equivalent or greater benefit for those who have PMA. 3. State the problem. Analyze and define it. 4. State to yourself enthusiastically, "That's good." 5. Ask yourself some specific questions, such as: A. What's good about it? B. How can I turn this adversity into a seed of equivalent or greater benefit? Or, how can I turn this liability into a greater asset? 6. Keep searching for answers to these questions until you find at least one answer that can work. Now, the problems that will confront you will, broadly speaking, be of 3 kinds: personal problems, emotional, financial, mental, moral, physical; family problems, and business or professional problems. Because personal problems are the most immediate problems experienced by all of us, we would like to tell you the story of a man who met some of the most severe problems a human being can experience. As you listen to this story, see how he applied PMA to the solution of each difficulty until he achieved ultimate victory. He met his challenge to change with PMA at Leavenworth Penitentiary. This man was born in poverty. While in grade school, he sold newspapers and shined shoes in and around the saloons on Seattle's waterfront to help his mother meet expenses. Later, he became a cabin boy on an Alaskan freighter during the summer months. After he finished high school at the age of 17, he left home. He became one of the horde of hobos that rode the rails and traveled to every part of the United States. His companions were hard-bitten men. He gambled, associated with riffraff, men of the so-called Border Legion. Soldiers of fortune, fugitives, smugglers, cattle thieves, and the like were his companions. He joined the forces of Pancho Villa in Mexico. You can't skate close to those extra-legal operations without knowing about them, even if you have nothing to do with them, Charlie Ward said. My mistake was being with the wrong companions. My major sin was associating with people who were bad. From time to time, he won large sums gambling, and then lost them. Finally, he was arrested for narcotics smuggling. He was tried and convicted. Yet throughout his life, Charlie Ward maintained his innocence of the charge on which he was convicted. Charlie Ward was 34 years old when he entered Leavenworth. He had never been in jail before in spite of his associates, and he was embittered. He vowed that no prison was strong enough to hold him. He looked for a chance to make a break. Then something happened. Charlie chose to change his attitude from negative to positive. He met the challenge to change with PMA. Something within him told him to stop being hostile and to become the best prisoner in the prison. From that very moment, the entire tide of his life began to flow in the direction most favorable for him. By the simple change from negative to positive thinking, Charlie Ward began to master himself. He changed the direction of his aggressive personality. He forgave the federal agents who had brought about his plight. He quit hating the judge who sentenced him. He took a real good look at the Charlie Ward of the past, and he resolved to avoid the very appearance of evil in the future. He looked around for ways to make his stay in prison as pleasant as possible. First, he asked himself some questions, and for the first time in his adult life, he found his answer in books, particularly the book. In his prison cell, he began to read the Bible. He read it and reread it. Thereafter, and up to the date of his death at the age of 73, he read the Bible every day for inspiration, guidance, and help. Because of his change in attitude, and consequently in behavior, he began to attract favorable notice from the prison officials. And one day, a convict clerk told him that a trustee in the power plant was to be released in 3 months. Charlie Ward knew little about electricity, but there were books on electricity in the prison library, so he studied. He learned what these books could teach him. At the end of 3 months, Charlie was ready. He applied for the job. Something about his mannerism and his tone of voice impressed the deputy warden. That something was the earnestness and sincerity of Charlie Ward's positive mental attitude. He got the job. Because he continued to study and work with PMA, Charlie Ward became superintendent of the prison power plant, with 150 men under him. He tried to inspire each one of them to make the best of his situation. When Herbert Hughes Bigelow, president of Brown and Bigelow of St. Paul, Minnesota, arrived at Leavenworth on a conviction of income tax evasion, Charlie Ward also befriended him. In fact, he went out of his way to motivate Bigelow to adjust himself to his environment. Mr. Bigelow was so appreciative of Charlie's friendship and help that as his prison term approached its end, he told Charlie, "You have been good to me. When you get out, come to St. Paul. We will have a job for you." 5 weeks later, Charlie was released from prison and went to St. Paul. As he had promised, Mr. Bigelow gave Charlie a job. He was given work as a laborer at $25 a week. Because Charlie worked with PMA, he became a foreman within 2 months. After a year, he became a superintendent. Finally, Charlie was made vice president and general manager. And when Mr. Bigelow died, Charlie was made president of Brown and Bigelow. He continued in this capacity until his own death many years later. Under Charlie's management, sales rose from less than $3 million to over $50 million annually. Brown and Bigelow became the largest company of its kind. Because of Ward's positive mental attitude and his desire to help those less fortunate, he himself received peace of mind, happiness, love, and the better things in life. By presidential decree, his rights as a citizen were restored in acknowledgment of his exemplary life. Those who knew him held him in the highest esteem and were themselves inspired to help others. Perhaps one of his most unusual and commendable activities was his employment of over 500 men and women who had come from prisons. They continued their rehabilitation under his stern and understanding guidance and inspiration. He never forgot that he too had been a convict. He wore a tag on his bracelet with his old prison number as a symbol. Charlie Ward had been sentenced to prison. That was good. Why? Who knows what might have become of Charlie Ward had he continued in the direction in which he was headed. But in prison, he met the challenge to change, and there he learned to use PMA to solve his personal problems. He made his world a better world to live in. He became a bigger and better man. No one will ever know the exact number of the needy who have prayed for blessings to Charlie Ward in response to their inner thoughts. I was naked, and ye clothed me. I was sick, and ye visited me. I was in prison, and ye came unto me. Fortunately, not everyone is faced with problems as severe as those which Charlie Ward was called upon to meet and solve. But there is a lesson in Charlie's story. In addition to the fact that he changed his attitude from negative to positive, you will recall Charlie himself said, "My greatest mistake was being with the wrong companions." Negative attitudes are often contagious, and bad habits are contagious. Let each of us look to our own associations and be certain to keep them on the highest possible level. One of the greatest services you can render to children is to motivate them to motivate themselves to select the right kind of friends and associates. Remember, vice is a monster of such awful mien, that to be hated needs but to be seen. Yet seen too oft, familiar with his face, we first endure, then pity, then embrace. Another force with which every human being has to contend, and which, if not met with PMA, can cause physical, moral, and mental destruction, is the power of sex. Sex presents the greatest challenge of change. Each human being has the power to choose for himself whether he will use the tremendous power of sex for good or for evil. Each human being must contend with the problems that will arise in his life because of sex. You can transmute sex into virtue or vice. One of God's greatest gifts to mankind is the power to procreate a human being. Sex is the means of procreation. It is power. Like all power, it can be used for good or for evil. Sex is a physical function of the body under the control of the subconscious and conscious mind. It is inherited. The physical sex organs, works of God, like all His creations, are good. The little difference that makes the big difference between the power of sex being a virtue or a vice is mental attitude. The inherent emotion of sex is one of the most powerful forces of the subconscious mind. The effects of its motivating power can be observed long before adolescence. This power blends with and intensifies the driving force of all other emotions. When it is in conflict with the will of the conscious mind, the power of imagination, as it affects the emotion of sex, has a tendency to win unless the conscious mind uses its power to affect, use, control, or harmonize with the powers of the subconscious. You have the power to choose. Choose wisely with PMA. Transmute sex into virtue. Thus you will win over one of the greatest problems you will ever have to face in your personal life, and you will be physically, mentally, and morally better. And what are the 7 virtues? Virtue is moral practice or action, moral excellence, rectitude, valor, chastity. The 7 virtues are prudence, fortitude, temperance, justice, faith, hope, and charity. 1. Prudence. The ability to govern and discipline oneself by the exercise of reason. 2. Fortitude. Strength of mind that enables a person to encounter danger or bear pain or adversity with courage. It is the possession of the stamina essential to face that which repels or frightens one, or to put up with the hardships of a task imposed. It implies triumph. Synonyms are grit, backbone, pluck, and guts. 3. Temperance. Habitual moderation in the indulgence of the appetites and passions. 4. Justice. The principle or ideal of just dealing or right action. Also conformity to this principle or ideal. Integrity. 5. Faith. Trust in God. 6. Hope. The desire with expectation of obtaining what is desired or belief that it is obtainable. 7. Charity. The act of loving all men as brothers because they are sons of God. It stresses benevolence and goodwill in giving and in the broad understanding of others with kindly tolerance. How can you transmute the power of sex into the good and the beautiful? A crystal clear answer can be found by you if you search for it as you listen to and study this entire book. Results will be achieved when you relate and assimilate the principles into your own life. But one must gain knowledge for himself. The following suggestions may be helpful as you search for your answer while listening. 1. Keep your mind on the things you want and off the things you don't want. This means that you keep your mind on immediate, intermediate, and distant desirable objectives. The instinct of sex in the subconscious mind will be patient if it has hope that you will fulfill life's mission. The boy or girl who is truly in love and plans to marry will not have the sex problems he or she might otherwise have. 2. If there were more and often earlier marriages, there would be fewer sex problems. Life's mission to procreate is fulfilled in marriage. However, marry for love beyond the sex instinct. 3. Lead a well-balanced foursquare life. 4. Work long hours at a labor of love. It will keep you busy, occupy your thoughts, and use up surplus energy. 5. Develop a magnificent obsession. Study the significance to be found in Chapter 15. 6. Relate and assimilate into your own life the concepts in Chapter 2. You can change your world. And Chapter 7. Learn to see. 7. Select an environment that will develop you best toward your objectives. 8. Choose the self-motivators for self-suggestion that you believe will help you. Memorize them. Make them a part of yourself so that in times of need they will flash from your subconscious mind to your conscious mind as autosuggestion. Not all the problems of one's personal life, however, are of so deep and penetrating a nature. Many times, all that it takes to meet an immediate problem is quick thinking, adaptability, and taking a second look at the situation which is causing the problem. It often takes only one idea, followed by action, to turn failure into success. It takes only one idea, followed by action, to succeed when others fail. In 1939, on Chicago's North Michigan Avenue, in an area now known as the Magnificent Mile, office space was going begging. Building after building had empty floors. One that was half rented was considered lucky. It was a bad year for business, and NMA hung over Chicago real estate like a cloud. You heard such comments as, "No sense in advertising, there just isn't the money around," or, "What can you do? You can't fight the times." Then into this gloomy picture came a building manager with PMA. He had an idea, and he got into action. This man was hired by Northwestern Mutual Life Insurance Company to run a large building on North Michigan Avenue which they had acquired in a mortgage foreclosure. When he took the job, the building was only 10% occupied. Within 1 year, it was 100% rented, with a long waiting list. What was the secret? The new manager accepted the problem of no demand for offices as a challenge rather than a misfortune. Here is what he did as he explained in an interview. "I knew precisely what I wanted. I wanted to have the premises 100% occupied with choice, substantial tenants. I knew that under the prevailing conditions, it was likely that the offices would not be rented for possibly several years. I therefore concluded that we had everything to gain and nothing to lose by doing the following. 1. I would seek out desirable prospective tenants of my choice. 2. I would stimulate the imagination of each prospect. I would offer him the most beautiful offices in the city of Chicago. 3. I would offer him these superior offices at a rental no higher than the one he was now paying. 4. Furthermore, I would assume responsibility for his present lease, provided he paid us the same monthly rental under a 1-year lease. 5. In addition to all this, I would offer redecoration without cost to the tenant. I would employ creative architects and interior decorators and remodel the offices of my building to suit the personal taste of each new tenant. I reasoned, 1. If an office were not rented during the next few years, we would receive no income from that office. so we had nothing to lose by going into such arrangements as are above described. We might come out at the end of the year with no income, but we would be no worse off than we would have been if we had not acted, and we would be better off because we would have satisfied tenants who would in future years supply dependable rentals. 2. Furthermore, it is an established custom to rent offices on a one-year basis only. In most cases, there would be only a few months left to run on the old lease of my new tenant. Promising to assume these rentals was therefore not too great a risk. 3. If a tenant should vacate at the end of his year, it would be comparatively easy to re-rent in a well-filled building. The redecoration of his office would not be money lost, as it would have increased the equity value of the entire building. The result was marvelous. Each newly redecorated office seemed to be more beautiful than the one that had preceded it. The tenants were so enthused that many expended additional sums. In one instance, a tenant spent an additional $22,000 in remodeling. So at the end of a year, the building, which had started off only 10% rented, was 100% rented. None of the tenants wanted to leave after his lease expired. They were happy with their new ultra-modern offices. And we gained their permanent goodwill by not raising the rents at the expiration of their first 1 year's lease. We would like you to think back over this story. Here was a man faced with a most serious problem. He had a giant office building on his hands that had 9 empty offices in it for every one that was occupied, and yet within a year, his building was 100% rented. Now right next door, up and down the magnificent mile, there were dozens of office buildings standing idle and practically empty. The difference, of course, was the mental attitude which each individual building manager brought to the problem. One man said, "I have a problem. That's awful." The other said, "I have a problem. That's good." A man who seizes upon his problems as opportunities in disguise and scrutinizes them for the good element that is going to be there is the man who understands the very core of PMA. The man who develops an idea that can work and follows it with action will turn failure into success. Time after time, the pattern repeats itself. Problems and difficulties turn out to be the best things that could have happened to us, provided we translate them into advantages. As you recognize, the problem which the building manager faced occurred during the Depression. Things were still plenty tough in 1939 when he solved this problem, but they had been much worse. Now, the economic problems of the nation and of the world arose as the result of the Depression. Depressions are caused by cycles in the economic life of a nation or nations, but it is not necessary to sit idly by. There is no need to be beaten and tossed to and fro by the cycles of life. You can meet the problem of cycles and conquer it intelligently. In so doing, you can often acquire a fortune. Make a fortune or achieve your aims by understanding cycles and trends. Many years ago, Paul Raymond, Vice President in charge of loans for the American National Bank and Trust Company of Chicago, rendered a service to his bank's customers. He sent them Dewey and Dakin's book, Cycles. Subsequently, many of these clients made fortunes. They learned and understood the theory of business cycles and trends. Some of them will be among those who won't lose the fortunes they acquired regardless of economic trends and changes. Edward R. Dewey, who has been the director for the Foundation for the Study of Cycles for many years, points out that every living organism, be it an individual, business, or nation, grows to maturity, levels off, and dies. What is equally important, he indicates a solution whereby, regardless of the trend or cycle, you as an individual can do something about it. You can meet the challenge of change successfully. You can change the trend as far as you and your interests are concerned, regardless of the general trend, with new life, new blood, new ideas, new activity. He anticipated a downward cycle and prepared to go upward. Before newspapers publicized the recession that began in the latter part of 1957, one of the bank's clients got into action. His organization went after business aggressively with a positive mental attitude. In 1958, his company developed a premium increase of over 30% compared to the previous year, which had shown a 25% increase. The entire industry, however, had a downward trend. Sometimes the cycle that presents a problem is not a cycle that affects an industry or an entire nation. It may be a cycle within an individual business only. This problem, too, can be anticipated and met. Witness the continual growth of many American corporations, in spite of the fact that in the normal course of events they would have grown to maturity, leveled off, and died. E.I. DuPont de Nemours and Company Incorporated is an outstanding example. They met the challenge with new life, new blood, new ideas, new activity. It is unnecessary to point out that E.I. DuPont de Nemours and Company Incorporated has continued to grow. But what is the cause of its success? Why has it not followed the natural cycle of growing to maturity, leveling off, and dying? DuPont has met the challenge of change with new life, new blood, new ideas, new activity. Its executives have met this problem with PMA and the determination to overcome it. They have continued to engage in research and are constantly making new discoveries, developing new products, and perfecting their previous products. They inject new blood into their management and study and improve their sales methods. Learn from their success. The owner of a small business, or you as an individual, can study and experiment. You can relate and assimilate the principles used by such a large corporation. You too can continue to grow with booster shots of new ideas, new life, new blood, new activity. You can change a downward trend into an upward one. You can be different. When others float downstream, you can move upstream. So many of the stories you have heard and will hear in this book indicate that if you have a problem, that's good. It's good if you learn to see how to turn adversity into seeds of equivalent or greater benefit. You may still not see the principle. However, the next chapter, entitled Learn to See, can help you. Pilot number 6. Thoughts to steer by. 1. So you've got a problem. That's good. Why? Because every time you meet a problem and tackle and conquer it with PMA, you become a better, bigger, and more successful person. 2. Everyone has problems. Those with PMA turn their adversities into seeds of equivalent or greater benefits. 3. Your success or failure in meeting the problems presented by the challenges of change will be determined by your mental attitude. 4. You can direct your thoughts, control your emotions, and ordain your destiny by recognizing, relating, assimilating, and applying the principles that are applicable to you to be found in this book. 5. God is always a good God. 6. When you have a problem, A. Ask for divine guidance. B. Think. C. State the problem, and D. Analyze it. E. Adopt the PMA attitude, that's good. F. Then change the adversity into seeds of greater benefit. 7. Charlie Ward is an outstanding example of a man who successfully met the challenges of change. Prepare to meet the challenges of change by developing PMA. 8. Sex is the greatest challenge of change. Transmute the emotion of sex into virtue. 9. The 7 virtues are prudence, fortitude, temperance, justice, faith, hope, and charity. Success through a positive mental attitude indicates how you can relate and assimilate these qualities into your own life. 10. One good idea followed by action can change failure into success. You've got a problem? That's good, for it's the seeds of greater benefits for those who have PMA.